Hello, everyone. Yes, welcome to another new season to my Yoruba family, Akasan, those who are here in Georgia, and Odaro to my Nigerian listeners, where it's about 9 p.m. over in Nigeria. So hold on tight for the next hour for another exciting and memorable episode on Issues and Answers with yours truly, Honorable Chief Mrs. Valencia Stovall Arbiola. And today is Monday, September the 15th. We are the Worldwide Community Empowerment Group, where we speak life into the community. You can log on to WCEG watch us on live on your smart TV, on the Roku cable channel, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now on FaceBase, Blue Sky, and Twitch. Yeah, y'all, we on some new stuff. Believe it or not. And you could download our free WCEG mobile app. Say, Alexa, play WCEG Talk Radio. Listen to WCEG on any of the 12 podcast distribution platforms. Last but definitely not least, I have to give this disclaimer. The topics and opinions of those of the show hosts and guests and not of WCEG Media Enterprise. And we thank you for your continued support of what we're doing with getting information out. All right, so I want to start off, of course, with a brief moment of silence. It's so much that's been going on, and sometimes we get very busy, and unless something kind of directly affects us, we usually don't take the moment to just understand that a lot of people are going through a lot of things. And so I want to take a brief moment of silence for those who are no longer with us physically and for those who are facing so many challenges and need words of encouragement. We have to remember to keep the faith and that God is in control. Okay, the topic for today is state versus state. I know some people like state versus state. What is state versus state? But before I even get into that discussion, I want to update you all on my international trip. I just returned back from my third trip to Nigeria. Specifically, I was in the states of Lagos and Ogun State. Of course, to see my husband and new family and friends, and just to a moment just to relax and get some rest from everything that was going on here in the U.S. But I, of course, came back refreshed and actually getting started on my global impact of making sure that those who want to experience the continent of our ancestors, those of you who say, well, hey, Valencia, I want to go and visit Nigeria. So I'm working on some projects pertaining to that by offering personalized tours to historical places in Nigeria. And we're going to do that probably at the beginning of 2026. Also working on building some water boreholes. So for those of you all who are not familiar, boreholes are like an elevated water tank because they don't, of course, don't have the infrastructure we have here in some of the places over there in the United States, especially in the rural areas where the villages are. And so I'll be working on the project of being able to build those water boreholes so that they can have fresh water coming straight from down below, many thousands of feet below, on how they do that particular construction. And so I'm definitely, that's where you all can play an important part when I get to that point of making a small contribution towards that. But right now, a lot of times we take advantage of the amenities that we have here. And every time my trip that I've gone back home, I'm gonna say home, to visit our ancestral land, I see how great and wonderful things are here in the United States, where we don't struggle. We might feel we struggle, but not like I've seen and witnessed over there. And not every place over in Nigeria is bad as far as the infrastructure and all of that. There are some places you will be amazed at some of the infrastructure of places I've seen, even some of the houses, the marble floors and everything. I was just like, wow, this is available over here. So as you know, with my shows, I continue to talk about my experience of things that I've witnessed. And hopefully one day you all will be able to join and being able to come back and witness as well. But I have a few more projects I'm working on coming up with, and I'll definitely keep y'all posted. But today I have on also today I have on Original Made. This top. I don't know if y'all can see it. I'm gonna try to sit up a little bit. It is called Adore Adore, and it is specifically made in Abeokuta. And I got a chance I actually purchased this top. It was sewn over in Abeokuta, which is the capital city of Ogun. And so that's where they originate this tie-dye from. And so I got a chance to see where the cotton actually came in, and it's only good on 100% cotton. So I saw where they received the cotton, and then how they did the dyes, the special dye treatment they do, and even how they came up with the different designs that they have on it. And so it was just amazing to see the level of entrepreneurship and creativity that took place right before my eyes. And I even have some other um, products or fabric that was able to get and purchase that I'll be wearing them every now and then when I come on my show, and even posting out on my social media so you all can kind of see what that was. But so that was my brief update for my trip. I just came back in August, the middle of August. I wanted to stay longer, but hey, I did miss my soul food, y'all. I missed my soul food. I haven't found a soul food restaurant over there yet. I miss my soul food. And of course, I've missed my family here as well. I'll be going back again. I don't know exactly if it'll be before the end of the year or not, but I will be going back. Now, let's get into the topic today that so many of you all are tuning in to hear about, which is dealing with state versus state. So a lot of times, many of you all might not know that a state our state like Georgia can sue another state when they feel like they have violated their particular state rights. You know, we as citizens are accustomed to suing each other in court. You know, if you do something to me, I say, well, I'm gonna take you to court. But have you ever thought about what actually happens and who handles the court cases when it's one state suing another state? Well, of course, the attorney general in each state handles that and represents the state in court. So just like you might have the prosecutor or you might have the defendant lawyer, our attorney general in each state is the one that actually presents the case, either defend it or present the case. And you all know that attorney generals are elected by the people. That's one of those elections. Actually, next year, the attorney general, along with governor and other statewide races, will be up in the state of Georgia for re-election or election. But that's a very important position at attorney general. And so before we get started on state versus state, I want to kind of give us a historic background on how is it that the state can sue another state, and even how can it, and who gives the ultimate answer to resolve whatever the state disputes are. And even when it comes down to some of the things that's going on in our federal government that we might not be understanding. So as a former legislator, I served on the House Interstate Cooperation Committee. Excuse me. So when you're elected, you're assigned so many committees in this case on the House side by the Speaker. On the Senate side, we've been by the Lieutenant Governor, and it's a committee that also helps to assign you as well. Well, when I first got elected, I was like, interstate cooperation, I don't have a clue. What is that about? And most newly elected people don't have a clue either. But we heard bills on how states collaborated or were in disputes. And so our job on that committee was to either pass legislation or hear different about reasons why we need to introduce legislation on state versus state disputes, or to clear up any other misinformation or things that make it keep it out of court. Okay, so I remember a couple of issues when I was elected. Excuse me, I don't know what's going on with my voice. I remember with the Medicaid payments to another state. So right now we have residents that, for example, that lived in Thomasville, Georgia, which is far, far south. It's about 30 minutes from the Tallahassee, Florida. To get to Tallahassee, Florida, it's about a 30-minute drive. Well, down in that area, they do not have certain doctors. So what the residents were able to do was cross the border, cross the Georgia-Florida border, and go into Tallahassee to actually see their doctor. Well, if they're in Florida, that means that's a Florida doctor. Where they may have Medicaid that's issued by the state of Georgia, then the state had to pass legislation to enable it to pay a doctor that's in another state, in this case in Florida, or it could be Alabama, it could be South Carolina, especially for those areas that are close to that border and they might not have doctors or whatever the case may be close to where they are, where they can go within the state. And so, so this particular case, we passed legislation to allow for those Medicaid payments to be made to the doctor in Florida. All right, so then we also passed bills dealing with the Georgia and Florida water wars. So some of y'all may remember, but it was very in the news everywhere, where Georgia and where Florida was sued Georgia over water rights in the Appalachia and Chattahoochee Flint River Basin. So that's the area in the state. And it was resolved in 2021 when the Supreme Court unanimously dismissed Florida's complaint. So this is the U.S. Supreme Court. So see how I was talking about the state of Florida sued the state of Georgia because it felt that Georgia was using excessive water from that basin, and as a result, it harmed Florida's economy and ecology, particularly its oyster fisheries in that particular bay, in the Appalachia Bay. I guess I'm pronouncing it right, but y'all can look it up. However, the Supreme Court found that Florida failed to prove that our state of Georgia water use was the cause of its injuries, citing other factors like Florida's own oyster harvesting practices, the practices that they were using, and their lack of adequate reshelling of oyster bars was its significant contributor to why that bay collapsed, as to why Florida could not utilize the oysters that it was harvesting. And so it wasn't Georgia's fault because of how we were using water. So that was one thing. So, and then another issue that happened when I was elected was the medical cannabis was another issue, which had garnered, of course, a lot of news nationwide because some states allow it while others don't. And HB1, which was the particular bill that Haley, I forgot Haley's last name, but it was the Haley Act, which allowed medical cannabis by oil to be able to be used for people that were in Georgia, because Haley's mom was traveling all the way to Colorado to get that medical cannabis oil for her daughter who was having excessive seizures. And so, but coming from Colorado and traveling all the way back down, even to get to Georgia, it was illegal because of the federal statute, the substance statute. So Georgia, we passed that bill to allow for the medical cannabis. Of course, it's according to THC oil level. You can go and Google all that. I'm not gonna get into that. But this is another instance of another state could have sued Georgia for allowing that particular patient to come through and get it from one state and traveling through another. She could have gotten arrested, she and her husband, and sent to jail and charged with a marijuana possession charge, only because she was trying to get it for medical treatment. So, this is some real serious thing. When I thought about state versus state, I actually was reading an article in the New York Times where they were talking about the different issues that could come up to cause a state to sue another state or have a dispute. So in the U.S., we have what's called a divided sovereignty. And you may ask, what in the world's divided sovereignty? I don't remember hearing that in any of our history lessons about the U.S. history. I don't remember hearing. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I don't remember hearing it either, probably because I wasn't really interested in it, and that's what kind of happens to us a lot. But according to the internet, the U.S. operates on a system of divided sovereignty, where the Constitution allocates powers to both the federal government and the individual states. The opposite is possessing supreme or ultimate power, which we know we are in a democracy, which is ran by the people for the people. So we're not in the opposite of divided sovereignty. So when you hear a lot of times people hear states' rights, the states have a right according to the U.S. Constitution, and I'm gonna get into that where it's located at. But that's the state right. So the federal government does hold supreme power over the states and the nation as a whole, particularly in areas like foreign policy, defense, and interstate commerce. So our Constitution has a limited amount of what the federal government can say and tell the states what they can and cannot do. That's why it's called divided sovereignty. Okay, so the state level power. So the states retain sovereignty in some areas, allowing them to regulate local roads, build prisons, pass zoning ordinances, and provide public services. So these are some of the powers also that are given to the local jurisdiction, like your cities, where they have power to be able to regulate local roads and passing zoning ordinances. Some of y'all might talk about a whole lot. You've been hearing in the news about housing and how affordable housing, how certain businesses they don't want in certain areas. So those are powers that are given to local jurisdictions like your cities and also to the state. And one of the terms that I learned as a legislator was called home rule, which means there are certain rules that local cities can implement in their jurisdiction that the state cannot overpower them on. So, which is the same thing when you look at on the federal government. Now we're talking about the states can implement certain rules that the federal government cannot overpower in certain instances. All right, so we're still talking about state versus state. So each state has its own constitution and its own government. However, these powers are exercised under the authority I talked about earlier, the U.S. Constitution. So our Constitution is considered superior to the states. This means states cannot act in ways that conflict with federal law or their constitutional obligations. So they can't conflict with the federal law or the federal responsibility of obligations that it has according to the Constitution. Other state disputes. So cross-border criminal investigation is another thing when I talked about the interstate, how you might hear one state collaborating with another state when it comes down to border issues. Immigration is one of those type of things that you may hear sometime. The sharing of resources and legal authority between states when a crime crosses state lines. So like when somebody commit a crime and they commit a crime, say in Georgia, but they travel to, let's say, South Carolina. And then you'll hear on the news where they say, oh, South Carolina authorities extradited or brought back that person and sent them back to Georgia where they could face their trial date because the crime was committed in Georgia. But even though they went to South Carolina and Georgia and all the other states have a agreement that if someone comes there and they have committed a crime, you send them back. So so that's what you're hearing a lot of times when people are missing persons, sex trafficking. So all those things that are called cross-border sharing or cross-border criminal investigations where states work together. So the United States is, of course, a federal system, not a unitary one where all power is concentrated at the center. So despite what we may be hearing or seeing in the news, we still have a federal system where it's governed by our Constitution. The term united in United States means that the states are united in a union, not that they are central entities within a single monolithic government structure. States function as distinct political units that are allowed to exercise governmental authority within their respective territories, but they are subordinate to the ultimate sovereignty of the nation. So y'all may hear a little screaming. That was my granddaughter, and but I haven't made her a co-host yet, and so you might hear her come in and out, but don't pay any attention. She'll be coming on a little bit later, probably in the year. You'll see her as one of my co-hosts. So I just want y'all to think I was ignoring a screen that was going on, but that's Nova. And if you're on my social media platform, you hear me talking about Nova, or even showing some pictures of Nova. So that was Nova. But getting back to, and then according to Wikipedia, the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows states to exercise all powers of government not delegated to the federal government. So all states and their residents are represented in federal Congress. So you all know we have a bicameral legislature that consists of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So each state is allowed two senators, and that is not regulated by population or the census. That's in the Constitution. And then the House of Representatives on the federal level have 435 members, and that is designated according to the U.S. Census that's taken every 10 years. And as a sidebar to that, some of you all may have heard in the news where the state of Texas decided that they were not going to go according to the population count of the last census, which was in 2020. That they some of the leaders there decided they were going to redistrict some of the areas to give more power to one party over the other. And then, of course, you heard California coming up with their proposition, which is a vote that they're going to have their particular voters to vote on in November to decide whether they would like for them to redistrict their congressional districts as well. And this is just for the House of Representatives. So so we do live in a bicameral where you have two houses, just like on the state level. You have a House of Representatives and you have senators, and both of them are the legislative body. Y'all know about the three branches of government, so we're talking about the legislative branch as well right now. And so we talked about that as far as the 10. I'm making my notes so I wouldn't get off track. So now there is also what's called the Commerce Clause, which grants Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce. So interstate commerce, of course, is what goes on within the different states, between the two different states. And it implicitly restricts states from passing legislation. So states cannot pass legislation that excessively burdens or discriminates against it. So one state cannot pass legislation that's going to cause a burden to another one. Like I talked about earlier with Georgia and Florida, Florida was saying that Georgia, with their water usage, was excessively burdensome of their oyster reharvesting. But of course, the U.S. Supreme Court came back and said, no, that's not the case. So you have the Commerce Clause. There was a ruling in 2021 by the Supreme Court dealing with remote worker taxation. So just like right now, it's a lot of people that are working remotely. And when you work remotely, that means you're kind of touching people from all over the United States, of course, even nationally, internationally sometimes, but we're talking about within the United States. What the Supreme Court justices declined to hear a case involving a New Hampshire challenge against Massachusetts, who had a policy of taxing the income of certain remote workers. So the justices did not want to hear a case when New Hampshire challenged Massachusetts on their policy on how they were actually taxing those people that was remote workers. And so that's what's considered a commerce clause. Other commerce clause disputes could be dairy industry regulations, how one state regulates what is acceptable when it comes to dairy. Then another commerce clause dispute could be solid waste disposal. So you may have one state regulating how they're going to dispose of their solid waste, and it may cross over and affect another state. Say, for instance, like you have Florida is at the bottom and you have Georgia. And say if Georgia had a certain way, especially down in that closer to that border area, where it was disposing of its solid waste and it crossed over to Florida, they may say, well, hey, wait a minute, that's a dispute with commerce. Another one is agriculture regulations. So those are just some examples of commerce clauses where states can go state versus state. And then you also have another part that's called the full faith and credit clause. And so whenever you have states disputing each other, you're going to hear some of these things that come up as some reasons as to why they may be taking one state, may have another state that they're taking. And at the end of the day, guess who paying for one state against the other state? We as the taxpayers are the ones that foot that bill. They don't have no special money that's set up to the side. It's the taxpayers' money that's used in these different disputes. Okay, so full faith and credit clause. Y'all remember that. Article 4, Section 1 of the Constitution requires states to recognize the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. In other words, if a state has put in records or judicial proceedings or things that they've decided on, another state is required to accept what those particular proceedings were that happened in that state. However, there have been historical and modern disputes over how this is applied. And let me tell you about a famous dispute on recognition of marriages. Yes, marriages is one of those that fall up on the full faith and credit clause and how it was disputed. So following the Supreme Court's ruling on Obergefell, may not be pronounced it, versus Hodges. This is in 2015. Congress passed the Respect for Marriage Act in 2022 to codify means put it into code. So no kind of law can be a law unless it's codified. A code is assigned to it. So you always see, so some of you all, like if you break a traffic ticket, break a traffic law, you may, and they say, oh, that's a state law, like your seatbelt is one. And it'll say OCGA, and it'll give a number with a dash and all of that. So that's what's that is the meaning of codified. I mean, it's in the code. It was passed by the legislative body, a legislative arm of the branch, saying this is what the law says, and then it's now in the code, and it's a code number that's assigned to it. And like in Georgia, we have what's called a title. So you have, I think maybe 40 titles. It might be a little bit more, but you'll see a number, a dash, and it'll tell you where you can find it at. So if any of y'all who researchers want to know more about that, you can Google OCGA or the official code of Georgia, and it'll tell you what all the codes are. And every time the legislators are in session, after that session ends, and the governor, after those 40 days, has up to 40 days to sign the law, either veto or let it lay on his or her desk, and it automatically becomes law. After that's done, then you have a whole other department that actually puts those codes and update them in the official code of Georgia annotated version. So that's what the lawyers use when they're arguing cases of everything that's going on. So I just want to give y'all that little brief of information for those who may not know what codified or codes are, or what you see when you get those tickets, or if you're going to sue somebody in court or something, then it's a state law that was broken, you're going to see a code that's with it. Okay, so another full faith faith and credit clause dispute has been on abortion and judicial records. So the debate over whether one state must turn over judicial records or assist another state in prosecuting someone who traveled across state lines for an abortion or even marijuana laws. So I talked about that earlier with the Haley Act when her mom crossed Georgia, Tennessee, however she got when she went to Colorado. That falls up on the full faith and credit clause, and so that's what that would have been disputed in that particular clause. Also, marijuana laws. So states that have legalized marijuana for recreational or medicinal use stand in direct conflict with the federal law that still classifies it as a Schedule I controlled substance. So I talked about that earlier. Refusing to enforce federal laws, that means states that choose not to help enforce federal immigration laws like sanctuary cities, the legal and constitutional issues surrounding local jurisdictions that limit cooperation with federal immigration authorities. So that's where all that is a real thin line in there as far as the federal law said immigration is supposed to be handled like this. ICE comes in, and then you've been hearing a lot of local jurisdictions and even some states said we're not cooperating with the federal government because those are our residents of our state, and we're not going to put any of our local resources, which is money, towards allowing our local public officers to help ICE, which is a federal agency, to come in and disrupt homes, families, or even businesses. Y'all heard the recent one with dealing with Hyundai down in South Georgia with what happened with the raid with ICE dealing with that. So all of those are things that fall up on the full faith and credit clause of our U.S. Constitution. Healthcare legislation is another one. Legal challenges to the Affordable Care Act based on arguments about federal overreach. And so all of these are things that you're hearing now: state versus state, state versus state, and even state versus the federal government said we don't think that you're able to you're overreaching on your power as a federal government. One other thing I did want to mention, I saw in the article with the New York Times, they were mentioning about Texas in a dispute with New York about abortion pills. So, you know, some states have banned they had banned abortion. Some of those residents were ordering abortion pills from another state, and of course, it was getting shipped by commerce coming into another state. So, say a person in Texas actually had wanted to have an abortion, and they ordered a pill from New York doctor, and New York doctor sent it through mail to Texas to the resident in Texas. So now you have states saying you're not allowed, because it's against the law here, you're not allowed to send that across the state line. And so for that, we're going to sue you as a doctor for doing that. And so now there have been some states coming up with creative ways that they're able to now, a way that they send the package, they're going to redo the way that they authorize them to send the packages in that particular state that wants to send those abortion pills. So you all can, like I said, you can Google it, Google Texas and New York abortion pill dispute, and see. I mean, it's really amazing. I never imagined how much as far as state versus state that all these things can actually be taking place here in the United States. When we say we're the land of the free and home of the brave. But I'll tell you, our Constitution, you can have freedom, but sometimes freedom ends up causing disputes. And then you have to look and say, well, okay, well, who's the ultimate decider on these disputes with states versus state? And even when citizens and local jurisdictions feel that the federal government is having an overreach. Okay, let's go on. Article 4, we're coming up to our time. So Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution guarantees that citizens of each state are entitled to the privileges and immunities of citizens in other states. This means states generally cannot discriminate against out-of-state citizens. One is like, you think about it, your license, your driving license. So when you drive into another state, they don't say, okay, because you coming through Tennessee and you coming from Florida, we need you to have Tennessee license. Or you want to drive all the way to Las Vegas, bless your soul if you want to, because I tell you one thing, that's a long drive. Me and my sisters them did it one time. I said, never again. I mean, it was good sightseeing, but that was a long drive, 30 some hours, I think it was. But anyway, so if you want to drive all the way to Las Vegas, Nevada does not say once you come into our state that you now have to get a license from Nevada. So they don't do that because of Article 4, Section 2, that guarantees the citizens having privileges and immunities that those states cannot discriminate against them. So your driver's license, one, employment. State of Georgia cannot tell its citizen that you can't go and work in another state. Of course, they have where they're going to tax you and you have to pay taxes in that state that you worked in, and you have to report those taxes to the state that you're living in. All of those are a little bit different. But employment, and then there's debates over whether states can require out-of-state residents to pay higher fees for professional licenses or jobs. So just like if you are a professional in one state and others say, well, okay, even though you have your license there, we're going to charge you a little bit more to have your license in our state. So there's some debates going on, and then it comes down to differential taxation. Whether a state can tax an out-of-state resident at a different rate than it does its own resident. So, a lot of times you might hear out-of-state resident, non-resident, and so there's a dispute or debate on whether Georgia can tax someone who lives in Florida that works in Georgia. I use Mississippi because I've been talking about Florida. So there's a dispute on whether Georgia can tax someone who's a resident of Mississippi but works in Georgia, but tax them at a higher rate than they would someone that lives in Georgia and works in Georgia. So those fall still up under Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution. State residency requirement, challenges to state laws that require a certain period of residency for access to benefits like welfare. So saying you have to live in the state for a certain amount of time, if you came from, let's say, Alabama, and you moved to Georgia, what's the residency requirement before you can access certain benefits that are the benefits in that particular state? So as you see, I have covered a lot of different topics. I don't know if my internet is acting up or not, but have covered a lot of different topics dealing with state versus state. And what I've covered is just a tip of the discussion on state versus states. One of the questions is, will there be any limits imposed on the divided sovereignty? The Commerce Clause that you heard, or full faith and credit clause, which will ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court. So earlier you heard me say who is going to make the final decision on state versus state, or whether the federal has overreached its powers. And even when it comes to even local governments that may have to go all the way up to Supreme Court. So those Supreme Court who are not elected officials, so that you all know, the U.S. Supreme Courts are not. Now, Georgia Supreme Court are elected officials. They are elected by the people. But the U.S. Supreme Court is appointed by the president upon the confirmation of of the Senate. So that's important. So we talk about elections. You hear me talk about it a lot. I mention it about, so who you elect is very, very important. And there's of course an election coming up for local governments this year, which is an odd year. And you have some local jurisdictions that have school board races that are happening, city council, and all of that as well. And also, there was another note. Someone said freedom of speech when it comes to your employer and where you are. So there's even a case that came up recently where private employers dismissed or fired some of their employees because of comments they made on their social media. And so I heard they were talking about that on the news this morning. And do employers have the right to fire you because of your own personal opinion that you voice on your own personal platform? And it depends on if you live in a state that's a right to work state, like Georgia's a right to work state. So those private employers do have the right to be able to fire you. And that was the discussion that was going on, and that could be to be disputed. And also, even dealing with standard operating procedures and doing stuff on your own time, just like even with campaigns. Sometimes people, they work for the city government and they may choose they want to support somebody else on their own time. They're not even on government time. So it's getting to the point that all of those are like rights that you should have, privileges and immunities that you should have as a citizen, to be able to voice your opinion about something that you don't agree with. But what the argument that the private employer said was that you being a representation of their company, and say on your profile on Facebook or LinkedIn, you had who you were working for. So they're saying that you making a comment about your own personal point of view could affect their business and how other people view their business, which could affect their bottom line. So you look at both sides. They have a good point. I'm a business owner. And if I had an employee that was saying something that was, whether I agree with it or not, but that may negatively affect my business and the profile of my business and the reputation, then that's something that I would question about whether I want that employee to still be employed at my company. And the vice versa. I'm an employee and I'm working for a company. I might not agree with some of the things, their stance, and I might decide that I don't want to work there anymore. And I have that right to don't work there anymore as well. So these are things that used to didn't be such a big issue that are now coming up as an issue. Also, should the employer have documents for employees to sign regarding this? That's a whole nother dispute. So you'll probably end up hearing the legislative bodies it's on the local level, state or federal, going to be talking about this. At what point do you have a right, and you have to sign something? Of course, some companies have you sign non-disclosure agreements, but that's for you not to disclose information about their operations of their company. Not sign an agreement saying I can't say what I want to say. We're in America. So there are consequences, to that. And you have to be able to decide, whether you having a free speech is more important than you working at someone else's job. That might motivate you to get your own business, to start your own business. Hey, you never know. But anyway, we're almost up to the top of the hour. But anyway, some solutions. I talk about issues, and I always like to bring solutions. So in some cases, states can offer greater protections for their citizens than the federal Constitution requires. It's one thing I just also thought about when I was talking about the right to work state. So every state in the United States is not a right to work state. And I think it was one particular state that actually had a legislation that they imposed that the employer could not use what you said on your own social media platform, personal platforms, to decide whether you're going to be terminated or continue to work. Okay, so let me explain what right to work. So right to work state means that I, as the employer, have a right to decide whether I'm going to allow you to work for my company or not. And so then you have what's called union states, where you have the union that people can't just fire you for no reason. Now, in the right to work states, there are unions that do operate and do help protect some of the people's rights to be able to work, and they help them out on that case. So that's a whole nother conversation. Maybe I may do a topic on the right to work versus union state, and bringing in someone that's for right to work, and then someone that's for union states. So that may be a topic that we talk about a little bit on another episode, because that's important for you to know, especially with all this that's going on across the United States. Okay, so some of the solutions I talked about is the states can offer greater protection to their citizens. The federal constitution requires the state's highest court its own constitution to provide stronger rights. So our Supreme Court individuals can decide on what those rights will look like for citizens. Congress can also use its spending clause power to influence states by attaching conditions to federal funds. Okay, like you all just heard this whole thing, you keep hearing every year about the funds may be cut, there's a pause in spending, and then also you heard where some of the departments have been decreased and funded. One particular issue that I was paying attention to was the SNAP program, which is usually called food stamps, and the after school programs. So federal funding is used for SNAP benefits or food stamp benefits. And so when there was a talk about funding was going to get cut, then you had a lot of people that were going to be affected SNAP, and especially our senior citizens who receive SNAP benefits as well. Even some of them don't get probably $16 to $20. That's a whole nother conversation by itself. But anyway, they were going to be end up being cut, and then those families who really need it were going to be cut as well. That included those that are disabled that were receiving SNAP. And I talked about senior citizens. So that was one thing where Congress has the purse strings to be able to say, okay, state, if you don't abide by what we have imposed as far as our laws or legislation or policies, then we're going to cut back on the amount of money we're going to send down to you. Education is another hot topic. The education department is another topic as far as how funds are sent down. Housing. So all of these major things that a lot of the states depend heavily on, early on child care is another one dealing with that. And even with the state of Georgia that oversees the CAPS program, which is a subsidy for parents who are lower income that cannot afford the normal rate of child care, during the week. And so they end up receiving a subsidy to help offset their expenses. And that's one of the things I even talked about. I was actually moderating a panel discussion with some private early childhood center owners, and we were talking about what are some of those issues and challenges that they see that needs to be on the top of the list when we're talking about this upcoming election. Deciding what those issues going to be beyond housing, beyond immigration, beyond health care. Our babies, if they're at the starting part of when it comes to education and getting the foundation, and if those 0 through 4-year-old kids don't have the support that they need through our early learning centers, whether they're private or public, then we see the effects of it, because we have third graders that are not reading on level. And you all see that they're not on level, but they're below level, and they're supposed to be there at a certain level. But if 0, 8, 0, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-olds, or 4-year-olds don't have that foundation, then that's the result you're going to get, because then when they enter into kindergarten, those teachers are having to play catch up for kids who are not ready. Some kids in a kindergarten without even having any type of early learning education. So that's a whole nother topic as well. I'll be bringing that talking about that as well. What is going on with our early learning centers and the support that they need to make sure our kids are getting that foundation that they are supposed to have. All right, so next, so Congress can use their purse string, just like the state can also and has used its purse strings when it comes down to what the local cities and counties are able to do because they're dependent on state funding. And so it's going to be interesting looking at the legislative session coming up. I think the governor had already said for the states not even ask for extra money. But so this is going to be interesting, this upcoming legislative session here in the state of Georgia, because how is the state now going to help ensure that some of our most critical departments that were dependent on federal money, federal funding, that they're going to be able to still be able to operate at the same level of efficiency. And then that's a whole nother area. Some of them have not been operating in the level of efficiency, and they do need to be reviewed at that. So that's a whole note. So yeah, I got a whole lot of topics to talk about. But okay, we're almost down to this one. So Congress can use its purse strings, and states can accept the money and the strings attached or decline the funds. As was the famous case with some states' initial refusal of federal Medicaid expansion money. So you all know that that's still a topic when it comes down to federal Medicaid expansion. That was one of those issues. The interstate compacts, when conflicts arise between states, for instance, over water rights, states can enter into legally binding compacts. That's what we were doing when I told you I served on the interstate cooperation committee. And that's what we did, was looked at compacts, and those are agreements among the states. Also, federalism reform. Policy debates often revolve around the idea of new federalism, of giving states more autonomy through mechanisms like block grants. You all know about the community development block grants. We call it CDBG. That's that money that comes down to local governments, state, counties, and cities to be able to spend on those areas where they see that they need to improve infrastructure, improve quality of services that are given. But they provide federal funds with less stringent federal oversight. So those are some other solutions. Advocacy and lobbying, that's where you come in at. States can challenge perceived federal overreach by having representatives lobby Congress of the president. They can also work through national organizations such as the National Association of Attorney Generals to advocate for state interests. So you as an individual citizen can also lobby. Your voice is important. Your voice is so important that when you go to that election poll and you decide who you're going to vote for, and you don't do your thorough research, don't go by because somebody's been in there a long time and, oh, they doing a good job. Go and find out, because eventually it's going to start affecting you, and you might end up being in the middle of an election cycle. So say, for instance, the person is a 4-year term, and say 2 years in, you start seeing some issues affecting you. Guess what? You got to wait for them 2 years to end out before you elect somebody else. So you got to endure a hardship for additional 2 years when you need to research who your elected officials are. So to make sure they're doing their job. Elected officials are supposed to do their job, and it's your job to hold them accountable. Nobody else's responsibility. So if your city, your county, and your state is not progressing like it's supposed to, you are to blame, because you keep electing these people who are not going to do a job, or just decide yesterday they want to run for office and don't have a clue about anything, have not been involved in the community, and all of that. That's a whole nother conversation. So I'm going to wrap up with giving you some announcements. I appreciate you all tuning in on State versus State. I hope it was very educational for you, that now you understand and be paying attention when you hear the states saying that they're going to sue one another and what it's all about. Remember, it had to do with the full faith and credit clause, the commerce clause, and also divided sovereignty. What are those things dealing with that, and looking into the 10th Amendment that also lays out a lot of things on what the federal government and the states are allowed to do. So this past Saturday, I was fortunate enough to be a part of the gathering, which is a wellness health event that took place in Morrow. It was full of a wealth of resources, physical activities, and knowledge of how to be more healthy for adults and children. I collaborated. It was a collaboration with Hand, Heart, and Soul Project, Georgia Youth Career Center, which is my business that deals with helping young people identify what careers they're naturally talented in. Men and Women in Radio Foundation, shout out to D Hill, who's always so supportive. Ready, Set, Push, that organization that deals with helping mothers who want to breastfeed and make sure they have all the resources that they need. Clayton County Community Service Authority, Melanated Pearl, and we had great sponsors like the Clayton Center, USDA, George B. Storer, Foundation, United Way of Greater Atlanta, Delta Community, Redefine Ed, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and the City of Morrow. I'd like to give a special thank you to all who attended, the many vendors that we had, to Commissioner Demont Davis, Clayton County Commissioner, and Councilwoman for the City of Morrow, Councilwoman Wynn, for bringing welcome remarks to kick off the day. We also gave away fresh produce from a local farmer. We also gave out some school supplies. Of course, it wasn't big like we usually do the back to school block party, because we don't do that anymore. So we implemented those school supplies as a reload for those who attended. Thank you to the National Leadership Group, Walking in Authority Teen Council, under the leadership of Sparkle Adams, Honorable Sparkle Adams, Jonesboro Youth City Government under the leadership of Jonesboro Councilman Alfred Dixon. They helped us by volunteering on Saturday, so we appreciate them for that. Next announcement and final announcement, Georgia Single Parent Coalition Planning Retreat. So if you're a single parent, or you know a single parent, or you used to be a single parent, we the Georgia Single Parent Coalition under the National Leadership Group is going to be hosting our planning retreat, which is going to be on Saturday, September 27th at 10:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Northwest Library, and that's 6131 Riverdale Road in Riverdale. And you can visit the website. I'm going to put it in the comment section, bit.ly/retreat single parent to register, or you can email info@nationallg.org to be able to for that. But I will post it in our comment. Time has caught us, y'all. All good things must come to an end. We will be back on Monday, October the 20th, 2025 at 4 p.m. for another interesting episode on Issues and Answers. So I will go here at Issues and Answers with yours truly, Honorable Chief Mrs. Valencia Stovall Abiola, is to educate you on those things you might not think about unless you are in a situation to be concerned. And y'all, we sure know how to be concerned today. There's a lot that's going on. So take care of yourself, and we will look forward to seeing you all on the 20th of October, right back here at the same station, same time. Like they used to say when you looked at Batman, same back channel, same back time, same back station. So be back here with WCEG. You all enjoy the rest of your week, and until then, thank you so much.